This video was brought to you by Black Verdict. If you want to keep receiving more interesting stories like this, please subscribe to our channel.
She lived on the edge of nowhere. A black woman with sun-worn hands and a spine made of iron.
Before the fire, before the fury, before the headlines and courtrooms and whispered apologies, there was silence and soil. She lived on the edge of nowhere. A black woman with sun-worn hands and a spine made of iron. Her name was Angela Price, and her only crime was refusing to leave the land her father left her. She didn't ask for trouble. She planted tomatoes, fed her goats, prayed every morning before the sun rose. The kind of woman you walk past without realizing she's survived more than you ever will. But in Mason County, skin color still writes the rules, and power still wears a badge. On a Tuesday afternoon, a man sworn to protect the law used a government tractor to try and destroy her life. And nearly did. But he didn't know her son had just returned from the shadows of war. That the same boy who grew up playing in that dirt was now trained by Delta Force to end threats before they began. This is the story of what happens when hate meets precision, when a forgotten mother becomes the spark, and when justice arrives wearing camouflage. They called it the Dust Line, a lonely stretch of farmland on the edge of Mason County, where the soil was dry, the people were poorer, and justice took the long way around. This was where Angela Price made her life, a widowed black woman in her mid-50s. Proud, strong, the kind of woman who could lift a hay bale with one hand and quote Baldwin with the other. She ran a 6-acre farm inherited from her father, surrounded by white neighbors who acted like she was a squatter, not a citizen. She never bothered anyone. Sold vegetables at the county market. Cared for 3 goats and a blind dog named Buck. Her son, Marcus? He hadn't been home in years. Last she knew, he was deployed overseas in a place where the sun never set and the enemy never slept. She missed him terribly, but she never said it aloud. Angela Price didn't believe in tears. She believed in planting things and praying they'd grow. But growth wasn't what Officer Brent Halley wanted. Brent was a third-generation cop with a chip on his shoulder and a Confederate flag tattoo hidden under his sleeve. He didn't like being told no, especially not by a black woman on land he believed should have never been hers. It started with trespass warnings, then a noise complaint, then citations for unkept grounds on a farm. Angela didn't flinch, didn't budge, didn't bow. That's when Brent escalated. On an April afternoon, Brent commandeered an abandoned roadside tractor from county storage. Claimed it was being illegally stored on Price property. Angela stood on her porch, arms crossed, as Brent rode the tractor, drunk with power, toward her crops. She stepped forward, shouted over the roar. "You're trespassing, officer. This is my land." Brent didn't slow down. He drove that rusted machine straight into her fence, tore through her carrots, and clipped her shoulder, knocking her to the ground. Then he laughed, brushed off his uniform and said, "Should have stayed in your place, ma'am." What Brent didn't know was that Marcus Price had just landed back in the States. And he wasn't just Angela's son. He was a Delta Force commander trained to hunt ghosts and dismantle warlords. And he was coming home. April 14th started like any other morning on the Price farm. The sun was warm, the air thick with dew. And Angela, she was on her knees in the dirt, whispering a prayer for her beans to sprout before the summer heat hit. It had been a hard week. The county inspector had left another citation in her mailbox, this time for environmental obstruction. A fancy way of saying, your land makes white folks uncomfortable. But Angela didn't rattle easy. She had learned to weather men with badges the same way she weathered Georgia storms. Hold steady and wait it out. But this storm came with wheels. Steel, noise, and hate. At first, she thought it was the county mower coming to trim the roadside. Then she saw the badge. Brent Halley wasn't just on duty, he was making a statement. No warning, no paperwork, just gas and rage. And he wasn't aiming for the fence this time. He was aiming for her rose, her land, her dignity. She moved fast, but not fast enough. The tractor clipped her side, sent her flying into the soil she had nurtured for a decade. Her shoulder fractured. 2 ribs snapped. A gash above her temple bled into the dirt like spilled ink. He waited 11 minutes before calling EMS. By the time the ambulance arrived, Angela's pulse was weak. Her crops flattened, and Brent was leaning on the tractor, chewing gum like nothing happened. He thought it was done. Another warning delivered. Another black woman put in her place. No cameras from the county. No media. Just dust and bruises.
Oh
But
my
980
God, he
miles
hit her.
away, a
Somebody
plane
call
was landing.
911.
And Marcus Price, Delta Force operator, Level 9 clearance, tactical specialist in recon and recovery, had just gotten a call. It was one thing to hurt his mother. It was another to think you'd get away with it. There's a kind of silence only soldiers understand. The one that comes right after the mission, when the body returns home, but the mind's still somewhere in the jungle. Marcus Price had just wrapped an 18-month Black Ops deployment across 2 continents. 6 successful raids. 4 rescues. Classified commendations he couldn't even tell his own mother about. He hadn't spoken to her in weeks. Didn't think he needed to. Until the satellite phone rang. The voice on the other end wasn't military. It was his cousin, Laverne. Half whispering, half sobbing. She only said one sentence before the line cut. Marcus. Aunt Angie's in the hospital. A cop hit her with a tractor. He didn't ask questions. Didn't call his CO. Didn't file a leave form. Marcus was airborne within the hour, rerouting through 2 bases for IDs and a private flight that landed just past midnight in Atlanta. It had been 4 years since he'd seen Carter County. 10 since he'd called it home. But it hadn't forgotten him. As soon as he stepped off that plane, the air felt heavier. He arrived at St. Mary's General just after 3 a.m. The nurse knew who he was before he even spoke. ICU. Room 214. They're keeping her stable. Angela didn't look like the woman who raised him. She looked small. Pale. Tubes in her nose. A bandage across her forehead. Her hand wrapped in gauze. He stood there for 47 minutes without saying a word. Then he turned to the attending nurse and asked 3 questions. Who filed the report? What did it say? Where is he? The report said accidental property dispute escalation. The officer was Brent Halley. He was still on active duty, and according to records, had been cleared of similar complaints before. Marcus didn't scream, didn't threaten. He just walked out of the hospital, bought a burner phone, and made 5 calls. His old team owed him favors. A recon drone, satellite footage, police radio scrubs, and most importantly, access to a secure database the Carter County PD had no idea existed. They thought they'd hit a defenseless woman in the middle of nowhere. What they didn't know was that they'd just woken up a war machine who knew how to dismantle empires from the inside. Every mission has a target. Every target has a weakness. Marcus wasn't after revenge. He was after proof. Evidence. Something more lethal than bullets, truth. He began where most cops don't bother to look, the paper trail. And Brent Halley? He had a long one. Brent had racked up 13 misconduct complaints in 7 years. No convictions. No demotions. Just transfers and sealed memos. Carter County PD had buried every accusation deep, until now. Marcus knew the language of cover-ups. He'd seen warlords bury their crimes under layers of red tape and smiling press conferences. Halley was no different. Just sloppier. Then he cross-referenced police call logs with 911 recordings. One anomaly stood out. A dispatch time logged 11 minutes after Angela was struck. But footage showed Halley on scene long before. That delay wasn't carelessness. It was a strategy. It gave him time to control the narrative. Inside was gold. An old whistleblower report from 5 years earlier. One that never made it to trial. Halley had once threatened a Hispanic teenager during a routine stop. There were photos. Audio. Suppressed. This wasn't just brutality. It was a pattern. And Marcus knew, if there was a pattern, there were victims. The victims who vanished. He knocked on 6 doors in 3 days. 5 people had filed complaints against Halley. None were willing to speak, until he found the 6th. Rachel's son, Isaiah, was pulled over at 16. His head slammed into the patrol car. Halley filed resistance. The county dropped the case. Isaiah stopped speaking after that. Literally. Trauma stole his words. Marcus didn't press. He just handed Rachel a number and said the words only a soldier could say with certainty. I'll make sure he never does it again. Infiltration. Marcus began feeding evidence into a secure server. Redacted it. Labeled it. Filed a formal complaint anonymously with the state DA's office, citing federal-level misconduct and obstruction. He sent it to 3 journalists. 1 ignored it. 1 asked for more proof. The 3rd? A podcaster named Devin Quay who specialized in exposing corrupt sheriffs in the Deep South. But Halley was already getting nervous. Unmarked car outside the Price farm. Marcus saw it. He saw everything. Trained eyes don't miss threats. They logged them. The setup. On the 7th night, Marcus set a trap. He leaked a report. False tip. Claimed new witnesses were coming forward. Waited to see if Hallie would take the bait. Hallie showed up at the old grain silo. Flashlight. Gun drawn. Looking for files that didn't exist. Now Marcus had what he needed. Video proof of Hallie tampering, lying, and hunting evidence. And that's when he called the FBI. Marcus Price didn't call the police. He didn't trust them. He called someone else. A woman named Agent Karen Thorne, Internal Investigations Liaison for the Atlanta Field Office. A federal enforcer of the truth. Marcus laid it all out. The false reports. The witness intimidation. The drone footage. The 10-minute delay. The bruised victims. And then the video. Hallie trespassing. Searching. Desperate. 3 days later, an unmarked federal van rolled into Carter County. Officially, it was a joint agency audit. Unofficially, it was an operation. 6:47 a.m. Hallie arrives at the department sipping coffee, unaware that agents are already in the server room, cloning hard drives. The county clerk's office is locked down. No files can leave. All badge access disabled. And Hallie? He still doesn't know. At 7:14 a.m., Agent Thorne walks into Chief Dunlap's office and drops a folder marked DOJ, Civil Rights Division. By 8 a.m., the trap is closed. Hallie steps out of the break room, spots the black SUVs, and runs. He doesn't make it far. Marcus watches from a block away, sees the moment Hallie's face hits the asphalt, and for the first time in years, breathes. Trial and truth. The trial lasted 19 days. Testimonies from victims who finally had names and faces. Isaiah Denton, Rachel, even Devin Quay, the podcaster, took the stand, detailing how the system tried to silence them. The footage broke the silence. Hallie's lawyers argued confusion. Overwork. Miscommunication. But there's no confusion in cruelty. And the jury didn't flinch. Guilty. Brent Hallie. Convicted on 5 counts, aggravated assault, abuse of power, obstruction of justice, falsifying police records, and attempted manslaughter. Angela stood beside her son outside the courthouse. The same land that tried to bury her now held her up. Reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. But Angela just smiled. "That's my baby," she whispered. "Told you he'd come back strong. Justice doesn't come in one moment. It's built case by case, life by life. And sometimes, by the son of a woman who wouldn't back down." If this story moved you, subscribe to Black Verdict. Share it. Speak it. Because silence is the soil where injustice grows. It began on a rainy Monday morning. Cold. Steel gray sky. The kind that presses against your bones. Carter County Courthouse had never seen a trial like this. Inside courtroom 4B, rows of wooden benches were packed. On the left, victims, activists, and quiet anger. On the right, uniforms, legal suits, and a man whose hands had written lies in blood, Brent Hallie. Jury selection and opening statements. They vetted jurors for 3 days. 8 men, 4 women. A mix of rural teachers, clerks, a retired school bus driver. One of them, a black mother of 2, clutched a folded photo of her teenage son during every recess. This is not about vengeance. This is about accountability. This is about a man who believed his badge gave him the right to crush lives, until one of those lives pushed back. The defense tried painting Hallie as a good man in a bad moment. A veteran officer under pressure. But the gallery had heard that story before. They weren't buying it anymore. Witness testimonies. Rachel Denton was the first to testify. She didn't cry. She didn't stutter. She stared right at Hallie and told the jury what he did to her son. "He slammed my boy's face into the hood for asking why he was pulled over. Isaiah couldn't sleep for years. And I stopped sleeping too." Marcus followed with security footage. Bodycam inconsistencies. Timestamps. Dispatch call delays. It was a masterclass in dismantling deception. But it was Angela, Marcus's mother, who brought the room to silence. She described the moment the tractor struck her. The pressure. The blood. But what broke the jury wasn't the pain. It was what came next. I remember the officer's face. He looked bored. Like my pain was just another mess he didn't want to clean up. And then she smiled, looked at Marcus, and said, "But I got a son who makes messes right again." Defense breakdown. Hallie's defense team tried character witnesses. A former chief. A retired officer. But under cross-examination, they crumbled. You said Officer Halley has a strong record. How do you explain these 13 complaints, all sealed, all involving unarmed civilians? One by one, the pillars of Halley's defense cracked. The final blow? Devin Quay, the journalist who'd received the leak, playing the audio of Halley's threats against Angela, recorded by a nearby neighbor's smart speaker. Some jurors looked away. Others stared at him, disgusted. The lie had become undeniable. The verdict. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. The court clerk's voice trembled as she read the verdicts aloud. On count 1, guilty. On count 2, guilty. On all counts, guilty. Justice doesn't restore the past. It doesn't erase scars. But it carves space for peace. And in that moment, Carter County saw something it hadn't seen in a generation: accountability. As the courtroom cleared, a woman pressed a note into Marcus's hand. It read, "Thank you. You didn't just fight for her. You fought for all of us." The courtroom is quiet now. No flashbulbs. No reporters. Just sunlight breaking through the stained glass windows and dust floating in still air. Justice, like healing, doesn't shout. It settles. Halley's badge was stripped. His gun logged in evidence. The uniform, a symbol once weaponized, now folded inside a box no one will ever wear again. A town wakes up. In the weeks that followed, the town changed. Slowly, quietly, police reform town halls went from whispers to headlines. Victims came forward. Stories that had lived in shadow found light. The mayor issued an apology. Public. Sincere. For the system that had failed its people for decades. A new oversight board was formed, with mothers like Rachel and students like Isaiah on it. And across Carter County, the phrase Black Lives Matter no longer sparked fear. It sparked policy. The commander without a war. Marcus turned down a book deal. Declined interviews. He wasn't chasing fame, just peace. He returned home. Planted corn where the tractor had torn up the field. And sat next to his mother every morning, coffee in hand. Some warriors fight with weapons. Others with truth. Marcus Price fought with both. And he laid them down when the battle was over. There is a crack in every system. And through it, sometimes the light gets in. This wasn't just about one woman struck by a man with a badge. It was about every silence, every wound, every child who grew up learning to flinch when justice wore a uniform. If this story moved you, subscribe to Black Verdict. Share it. Speak it. And remember, when the badge breaks, the people rebuild. The trial is over. The gavel has fallen. The cameras are gone. But something stays, not just in the courtroom or in the minds of the jurors, but in the soil, the air, and the silence of Carter County. Angela Price, once broken and bloodied in a field, now walks with her head high. Her cane taps gently on the pavement, not as a symbol of weakness, but as the rhythm of resilience. Marcus, her son, the commander, the prosecutor, the survivor, chose not to run for office. He didn't need the title. He already had the truth. And truth, once spoken, echoes longer than any election. On the edge of the old family farm, where the ground was once torn by steel, something new grows. Corn tall and golden. And a bench, carved into its back. To the ones they tried to bury, we were seeds. Justice doesn't erase pain, but it plants something else in its place. Dignity, memory, and a future. When the system fails, and when a badge breaks, the people rise. And sometimes, if this story moved you, subscribe to Black Verdict. Share it. Speak it. Because silence is the soil where injustice grows. Justice wears the face of the very child the system tried to silence.